Thanks again for joining us here today. We're very pleased to have you for this very interesting kickoff webinar in 2023. So once again, welcome to this board webinar on the independent evaluation of the GCF's Readiness and Preparatory Support Program that's currently undertaken by the Independent Evaluation Unit. So this evaluation is part of the IU's 2023 work plan and was approved by the board through decision B34/06, the work plan and budget of the Independent Evaluation Unit. Next slide, please. Thanks again. My name is Andreas Reumann. I'm currently the acting head of the Independent Evaluation Unit. And for those of you that are new to the GCF, I would also like to welcome you, especially my team and I represent the Independent Evaluation Unit of the GCF, one of the 3 accountability units of the fund. So to follow of what has become somewhat a tradition for our unit, my team and I are holding several IU webinars for the GCF board on the evaluative work of the unit, and that happens throughout the year. This webinar tonight is meant to provide you as board members and advisors with insights on the approach, the methods for the RPSP evaluation, so for the readiness evaluation that we're undertaking this year, as well as an opportunity to discuss the initial findings of the RPSP Synthesis Note, the first deliverable of the RPSP evaluation. This synthesis note has also been shared with you through the documentation for the upcoming board meeting. And you will find the synthesis note annexed to the annual report of the Independent Evaluation Unit. Tonight for this, I'm joined by my colleagues, Mr. Prashant Kuturi. He's the evaluation specialist at the IU. You see him here also on the screen raising his arm. And then followed by Anastasia Adelisheva, who is the Impact Evaluation Specialist AI at the IU, and lastly, Ms. Yonji Kim, Knowledge Management and Uptake Specialist AI of the IU. As you see on your screen, this webinar today is structured around 3 parts. So we'll briefly introduce the approach and the methods to give you an overview of where we're standing. We'll then turn into a brief presentation of some key takeaways with respect to the first deliverable of the RPSP synthesis note. And then lastly, we are turning to a question and answer session where we would like to invite you to come with any feedback that you have in regards to your experiences, but also the challenges that you perceive with RPSP, so we can take any of your feedbacks on board and take this into consideration for the further refinement of the evaluation. I should note here, and I just wanted to set the tone right, this is not a webinar on the results of the evaluation. We're at the very start of the RPSP evaluation, but we wanted to share with you a synthesis note, which is basically the collective evidence of all evaluations and reviews here at the GCF with regards to RPSP. And we share with you tonight the initial findings that we have from the RPSP evaluation that we put together in the synthesis note that hopefully is also informing you in regards to the upcoming strategic discussions on RPSP. So without further ado, I now turn it over to our first speaker, Prashant. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Andreas. Thank you for giving me the floor. I will be presenting on the approach and the methods that we intend to employ for this evaluation. So just very briefly to take you through the RPSP portfolio, as of B34 last year, RPSP, in IRM and GCF1 put together, we have had 639 RPSP grants, amounting for a total value of close to 460 million. The reason why we want to put this in context is also because you will see, and that also highlights the importance of undertaking this evaluation, is that you will see that the portfolio under implementation of RPSP has been seeing an exponential rise, if you will, and that can be seen in the chart on the right-hand side. Also, you will see that we have broken down the RPSP grants by regions, and you will see that Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America and Caribbean all have a large volume of GCF RPSP grant funding. So next slide, please. To quickly take you through the objectives of this evaluation, to put it very simply, there are two fundamental objectives of this evaluation. The first one is to inform the new strategy in a timely and useful manner. And second is to assess the operational approach, the approach that GCF takes through its RPSP program, and the operations, the effectiveness and efficiency of the operations of RPSP. So these are the twofold objectives of this evaluation. In terms of scope, we will be looking at the period over the RPSP 2.0, the RPSP strategy 2019-2021, which has now been extended to 2022-23. But we will also be looking at the previous RPSP program to the extent of understanding the evolution of priorities and focus areas of Readiness program. So we will be looking a little bit into the past, but only to the extent that it helps us understand the current RPSP program, RPSP 2.0. In terms of timeline, we will be undertaking data collection in the period of March to July. And simultaneously, of course, as a part of the data collection, we'll also be undertaking country case studies, which I'll come to towards the end of this segment of the presentation. The factual draft is expected to be shared by September 2023 with the Secretariat, and the report will be submitted to the board for the first board meeting of 2024, as has been laid out in IEU's work program budget, which was approved in B34. Next slide, please. In this evaluation, we will be looking at a wide range of criteria, and I'll break this down a bit further in the next slide, at least in a summary manner. But just to say that we'll be looking at this evaluation through the lens of a wide range of evaluation criteria, the core evaluation criteria, OECD type evaluation criteria, which are relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability. We will also be looking at coherence in climate finance delivery with other multilateral entities, because GCF is not the only entity out there which gives out readiness funding. Then there's the very, very important dimension of gender equity, but also in the wider lens of social inclusion, country ownership, innovation, replication scaling up, and also unexpected results, both positive and negative. Next slide, please. Now, allow me to break down a little bit, to a limited extent, some of the criteria and some themes that we want to look at a bit more closely, right? And the questions we want to ask under, to some extent. This is an initial matrix. We're still developing it, but just to share with you the initial matrix. First, of course, we'll be looking at the relevance on to what extent is RPSP goals and objectives aligned with beneficiary and stakeholder needs. And when we talk about beneficiary and stakeholder needs, we also are talking about country needs, of course. Second, we'll also be looking at, of course, the GCF operating model. By this, what do we mean? We're essentially looking at all the mechanisms and tools that GCF is employing to deliver on its readiness program. How coherent are they? How are they mutually reinforcing with one another? And are the mechanisms well suited to deliver on the readiness objectives and country expectations, very importantly. In terms of effectiveness, RPSP 2.0 has 5 objectives, which my colleague Anastasia will come to later on. But just to say that to what extent is RPSP achieving or expected to achieve its objectives. And of course, when we ask the question, readiness for what? If the answer to that is climate finance, then to what extent are countries getting more climate finance as a result of readiness? Then, of course, there is, as mentioned earlier, the very important dimension of gender and social inclusion. How are the social inclusion and gender dimensions integrated and touched upon by RPSP? And one of the ways, of course, that to go into slightly more specific detail, One of the ways of looking at this would be, for example, to understand to what extent has readiness supported inclusive, policies around ESS, for example, or policies, say, gender policies at the country level. So these are some of the aspects that we'll be looking at under this dimension. In terms of coherence and complementarity, we'll be also looking at, in the galaxy of different entities which deliver on readiness at the country level in different countries, how is GCF readiness program interacting with them and ensuring complementarity with their efforts? And a logical question to ask out of that line of inquiry would be to understand what is the comparative advantage of GCF's RPSP compared to the initiatives supported by other organizations. And lastly, we'll be, of course, looking at efficiency, to what extent is RPSP delivering in an economic and timely manner. Next slide, please. In terms of methods, we will be employing a theory-based approach, and as in a theory-based approach, of course, one starts with a theory of change. Just to highlight that GCF's readiness strategy of 2019-2021 does contain a theory of change. We will be building upon that to construct a more detailed theory of change, which is suited for our evaluative purposes. And we'll be using that to undertake contribution analysis, because ultimately, as mentioned, it is a complex landscape at the country level. So we'll be undertaking contribution analysis through the theory of change. We'll also be undertaking key informant interviews and focus groups. Here, I would like to highlight that when it comes to key informant interviews and focus groups, there are two sets of course, we'll be undertaking, such kind of interviews with country level stakeholders, but at the institutional level, we'll be especially focusing on the top delivery partners in terms of volume and value, and we'll also be focusing on interviews and focus group discussions with what GCF refers to as the framework agreement partners, FWA partners, who have a corporate level agreement with GCF Secretariat, because they are expected to take on a lot of GCF, they're expected to act as delivery partners in a big way. So we'll be focusing especially on them. We'll be undertaking portfolio analysis based on the databases that IEU has constructed and GCF also has. An online perception survey is expected to be undertaken with NDAs and DAEs, and also pipeline DAEs if, based on our ability to get their details. Country case studies, which I'll come to in a moment. Synthesis of existing evidence, which we have already undertaken to some extent, and my colleague Anna will present that in the second part of this presentation. And lastly, we'll be, of course, capitalizing on the existing and new reviews and initiatives which are being undertaken by Secretariat and IUs. So we are in close contact with different quarters in the Secretariat and also with our IUs to see what work they have undertaken in readiness, and we'll build on that to the extent that the situation that our independence and their ability to share information with us permits. We have already undertaken a brief pilot study to dovetailing around our ongoing LOTA work, and we have piloted some questions at the country level, and we are using that feedback to strengthen our approach to this evaluation. Next slide, please. Lastly, as promised, on the country case studies, some of this, we are looking at a wide range of selection criteria. Some of them, for example, are, the high, countries where there is a high number of grants, value, and volume. Then we are looking at a diverse range of readiness objectives, representing the wide range of the readiness objectives. If they're sufficiently represented in the sample, we're taking a sample in such a way. The geographic diversity, the diversity of GCF's priority country groups, the number of the two other dimensions we're looking at are number of accredited and approved DAE projects, a number of pipeline DAEs and pipeline projects at the country level. When I say pipeline projects, pipeline DAE projects as well. Lastly, and also very importantly, we are trying to select countries which have not been visited so far for country visits in previous evaluations, so that we can expand on the external validity of, we can build on previous findings on readiness and also expand the external validity of the findings of this evaluation. We have a long list of countries that we are still preparing and we are sharpening, but the shortlist is currently being carried out. But just to kind of give you an example of some of the countries, say in the long list that we're looking at, just to give you examples, there's Armenia, Belize, Ivory Coast, Bhutan, Mexico, and countries countries like these. And there are others also that we are considering as we speak. So I will stop there and I will hand over the floor to my colleague Anna, who will present on the synthesis note. Over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prashant, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight. So I'll be talking about the findings from the previous IU evaluations relevant to RPSP. We reviewed around 14 IU evaluations so far and GCF documents starting from 2018 until now, including the findings from the 3 most recent evaluations: evaluation of the GCF investments in the African states, direct access synthesis, and the second performance review. This synthesis note serves as an evidence base for what we know so far on RPSP, and some of these findings we may revisit in the new 2023 evaluation. Next slide, please. Briefly on what is RPSP. According to the governing instrument, board decisions, and the RPSP strategy, next slide, please. Thank you. It's a capacity assessment and development program that is aimed at achieving the following 5 strategies, 5 objectives: capacity building for NDAs and direct access entities to develop a pipeline of projects and implement GCF-funded activities, strategic frameworks, developing country programs, help address policy gaps, etc., help with national adaptation plans and adaptation planning processes, pipeline development, especially from direct access entities in seeds, LDCs, and African states, knowledge sharing and learning. So this is a cross-cutting objective, ensuring that the best practices are used for capacity building, direct access, pipeline development, etc. These objectives are supported by outcomes, indicative outputs, and indicators. The strategy lays out new or improved modalities, country readiness assessments and plans, multi-year allocation grants, institutional support to direct access entities, sector-specific planning, and so on. It also aims to enhance readiness results, one of them being knowledge and results management system. Next slide, please. So now we move on to the findings of our IU evaluation so far. So we structure our findings based on the evaluation criteria. So first we highlight the relevance and internal coherence. We find that RPSP is relevant to global priorities and country needs, but it needs more strategic clarity and vision. We also see that portfolio has evolved over time, as Prashant showed on the graph, and country priorities shifted from purely awareness of climate change in GCF to pipeline development. In terms of internal coherence, more clarity between RPSP and project preparation facilities needed, as both aim helping with programming. And RPSP requires also better integration with the accreditation process, which in turn can help increase the relevance of RPSP for countries and entities. In terms of efficiency, we find that in many of our evaluations that the processing times for RPSP grant requests are lengthy and disproportionate to grant size. Delivery partners are overwhelmed by the extensive documentation required and the extended delays and feedback. As a result, previous evaluations from IU recommended simplification of the access to RPSP, but also tighter integration between readiness for pre and post accreditation support by suggesting a single RPSP grant with milestones. Moving on to effectiveness. RPSP can be affected by a wide range of factors, external factors. That could be in-country institutional factors, for example, high staff rotation at the NDA level, or effects of other climate financial institutions that target readiness. The evaluations also highlight a lack of reporting transparency between accredited entities and NDAs. In terms of accreditation, most recently, many direct access entities have managed to secure accreditation, but challenges around capacity to prepare the project's funding proposals still remain. Until recently, there was no systematic framework for measuring the results, and with the introduction of the Readiness Results Management Framework, RMF, last year, this is likely to be improved. However, this needs to be still assessed. Also, we find that more monitoring and evaluation needed for ESS, for environmental and social safeguards, including gender aspects. In terms of strategic frameworks, so on the one hand, readiness supports country programming. On the other hand, country programs need to elaborate what kind of readiness supports they require, but they are at times inconsistent in doing so. And they're also seen more as an administrative requirement. Also, the deliverables on country programs are not systematically collected or shared at the moment. In terms of knowledge management, there is a positive trend there with regards to RPSP. Evaluations found that readiness promotes awareness raising about GCF and facilitates information sharing events. And there is also an appreciation of structured dialogues. In terms of pipeline development, there is an upward trend. This trend is recent and not universal across the countries. In SEEDS, for example, this is not the case. And there are also doubts whether RPSP is sufficient for transformative project pipeline development. Next slide, please. Finally, with private sector, we see limited capacity for funding proposals, and we found that more focus is needed for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and support with countries' policy institutional framework, which may help the private sector to invest in climate projects. Access to vulnerable states, SEEDS, LDCs, and African states is difficult, and effectiveness is limited due to a lack of institutional capacity. It takes longer time to access RPSP. There is, however, higher success in accrediting in SEEDS. But what we also found in the Africa evaluation just recently, that there is a need for a more tailored approach for vulnerable states. Especially this relates to fragile conflict-affected countries and countries with no single country projects. RPSP support for adaptation planning, it started in 2016. Grants usually last for 3 years, and several grants receive no cost extension. Some of the current challenges are low capacity of preparing proposals, lack of matchmaking with delivery partners, a low capacity of NDAs and delivery partners. And we also found that delivery partners need some sort of a hand-holding in order to deliver on their objectives. And they don't always possess alignment with country needs or capacity to deliver under readiness. So these, in a nutshell, are the previous findings. So synthesis of findings for previous evaluations. So they have to be revisited once we move forward with a new evaluation. Thank you very much, and it's over to you, Yonji.
Thank you, Anna and Prashant, very much for the very informative presentation. So now we would like to turn to you, dear board members and advisors. So it's time for us, to hear from you, to see if you have any feedback to share with us, any experiences or learnings, considerations that we should think about for our new RPSP evaluation. So you're welcome to raise your hand to come in. Or you could also, use the chat box to post your question. And while you gather your thoughts, I don't currently see any questions yet. So maybe I will ask Prashant, who is one of the co-leads for this evaluation. Prashant, what do you think would be the value added of this new evaluation on RPSP? Because the IEU already conducted a similar evaluation back in 2018. And I also understand that there are some similar reviews maybe on the topic that's being undertaken by other independent units and secretariat divisions. So could you tell us how this evaluation will be different from those of others? So yeah, please come in.
Thank you, Yonji. So I would say that there are three, probably broadly speaking, probably there are three dimensions of value addition that this exercise would bring over and above the other similar work which is being undertaken or which has been undertaken within GCF. First is that we are going to the countries and gathering results from there firsthand, right? So we are collecting results from the countries and aggregating them at the global level and bringing results from the countries and how the results are being brought about. This last dimension is important because this also then goes into the second dimension of value addition, which is that not only are we going to talk about the results that have been achieved, but we're also going to talk about how the results came about, right? So the theory-based approach is not just a term, but something that we very much consider at the core of the value addition of this particular exercise, which is to say, if you're seeing this result, what are the mechanics behind bringing about this result, right? That is the second. And third is that we want to use this exercise also to benchmark and see what other entities are also doing in readiness and what they're doing well, and whether they have also faced similar challenges and whether they have had similar opportunities as GCF, and where has the divergence or convergence happened. So when we talk about comparative advantages, when we talk about looking at comparative advantage, when we talk about looking at coherence and complementarity, that is another dimension that we want to look at, is to say, okay, what can we learn from others' experiences as well? And this is something which I think IU is in a unique position to undertake because we have the mandate to actively go out and seek these inputs. So these are the threefold value addition, in three dimensions, if you will. Over.
Thank you very much. And now we have two hands raised, and Richard was first. So Richard, please go ahead, and we will come to Mihai next. Richard, go ahead.
Thank you to the IEU colleagues, and thank you for having this meeting with us. And good afternoon to everybody. Good morning, good evening. Just a couple of reflections. One, will the evaluation try and present a better sense of what the overall resource allocation for readiness should be? And what I mean here is, if you look at the board decision from B08, it establishes the $1 million per country per year, but we don't actually allocate that money, right? So if you add up the 4 million over 4 years plus the 3 million, that's 7 million per country. And then you times that by the 143 developing countries, you're getting to a figure of anywhere between 800 million plus, right? Is that the appropriate level of resources that a fund like the GCF should be establishing? Because what we're getting more and more is requests from our colleagues in the COP process for more readiness money, right? Sort of, we've always argued that going beyond 10% of the overall GCF resources is going to be a stretch and not necessarily a good use of time. And if you do the numbers, that's like maybe it's 100 SAPs or what have you. So where is the best value for the money? So one, are you going to look at that? Two, are you going to critique the readiness model, the GCF readiness model, in relation to other models? So, I mean, we at least as the African group had argued in the beginning that the GCF should try and learn lessons from the multilateral fund readiness program that was more under UNEP, the Ozone Officers program, because that was sort of structured around Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, and then they had this model of actually paying for ozone officers, right? So one of the things that we get complaints about is that the GCF readiness program doesn't and will never do institutional capacity building because it's often very difficult to pay for salaries in the NDA, right? So are you going to look at that? I think that this evaluation needs to be that macro level. Is the model the right one, right? And then there are also other things, and I'm going to point to the Africa evaluations. Often, and I say this to Andreas quite a lot, often you make suggestions, but then you don't give us the sense of what that could look like, right? So in the Africa evaluation, you say that the country programs are not that useful, but you don't tell us what would be useful, right? What, in your opinion, of assessing all these structures and processes, what actually could be useful? And we would be very interested in looking at a totally new, or having information in front of us that looks at a totally different model for readiness, because the current system is not working. It's not getting this desired results, and there are reasons for that. There could be design reasons, it could be the secretariat processes, but it could simply be that we're not actually putting the money in the right places, and there's too much capacity. And then my final point is, will the evaluation look at the secretariat capacity, because we've delegated this authority to the executive director? The board has literally no oversight or involvement, rightly so, but also the board doesn't really get a sense or accountability for the delegated authority from the secretariat. We've heard numerous stories of how the delegated authority can be misused. We don't know if it has, but we hear stories all the time from countries. So we'd be interested to see if you're going to look at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard, very much for your insights and views. So maybe I could invite Andreas to come in on the various points that Richard mentioned. And then, of course, there will be room for Prashant to come in, or Anna. But Andreas, I give the floor to you. So go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Yonji, and thanks, Richard. Certainly interesting points that you made here. I mean, I hear this question more often now, that we need to look at alternatives under alternative models, so things that are not currently done, but looking at what could be done instead, and learning from other institutions. We'll certainly can do this now, as this is the second RPSP evaluation. So we'll definitely take this into consideration for some of the line of questioning that we have. It would obviously be outside the question of relevance and effectiveness and efficiency, but far more a question for relevance, and to see what might be alternative solutions. So that's well heard and taken on. The delegated authority, we have looked at that and asked ourselves in what way we could be looking at how effectively that has been done. Here we have no comparator, so it's a little bit difficult to do, but we're currently thinking about looking at what the strategy lays out as outcomes and outputs for the readiness program, and what was mentioned there in terms of enhancing readiness results. So Anastasia was just presenting on that in that one slide where she presented the RPSP at glance. That's for us the avenue to say, okay, let's look at this and how well this has been indeed fulfilled from the perspective of strategy. I might add, we have done a first step for this as well, which was the management action report for RPSP, where this was submitted to the board about a year ago. We're certainly able to bring this up as well and go a little bit deeper from that angle in the evaluation. So that's heard as well. The last one on the allocation of readiness, certainly this is an issue, because we're certainly seeing that this is far beyond on what's actually being placed in the countries, and you saw that from Prashant with the assumption there, with the snapshot there of the summary of current grants being pushed through. Yeah. So thanks again, Richard. Very well taken, and we'll take this on board and look at that more deeply in the refinement of the methods. Thanks, Yonji. Back to you.
Thank you, Andreas. So if I may, so Mihai, thank you very much for your patience. So please come in now. Yes.
Thanks a lot, and good day to everyone, and thanks to the IU colleagues. Good to see all these really good and familiar faces. So just a couple of points, I guess, and a point of clarification on how I think is the effectiveness criteria and how effective readiness is, and I guess the linkage to Para 40 of the governing instrument. It would be good to understand as well in more detail how you're going to study the connection between readiness and what is the latter part of that paragraph, which talks about in order to enable countries to directly access funds. So it'd be good to see how you're going to impact that, because I think that is a very crucial and important part of readiness and building capacity. So that's one thing. The next thing is something that I've been highlighting over the last term on the connection between the readiness program and the PPF, right? And again, coming from this experience of implementing readiness, we've seen the Secretariat's application of what is readiness and what is PPF to sort of give this false divider that concept notes are readiness and then full funding proposals are PPF. And you could imagine in the space of working in a government environment, taking an entire year, 18 months to develop the concept note, to then potentially have, you know, the slightest change in political will, circumstances, economic situations would then, you know, completely render, even though you do a really good concept note, render after doing it for 18 months, where you could have spent the same amount of time just doing a funding proposal, right? It just renders it completely irrelevant because it is not fast enough, right? To get the concept out the door and to get the funding, and then your executive, your government branches are like, oh, you know, this is all you produced after 18 months, right? And so I remember in earlier versions of readiness, at least, you know, when we did our first and second readiness, there wasn't this real harsh divide between readiness and PPF. And now the Secretariat, I don't know if it is to potentially justify, you know, having certain units or departments and false dividers in the staff of the Secretariat, but it doesn't help with getting projects, good projects on the ground. And we find at least that the amount of money that you spend on building a concept note versus building a funding proposal is roughly around the same amount. And what you're just doing is doing it over again, essentially, with more finer details. So is there a way to integrate these processes? It might be something a bit too radical to think about, but I think that currently the false divider stymies any sort of progress in us getting funding proposals. So that's the second point. The third point is on a push towards a programmatic approach, multi-year readiness, right? I know that that is obviously very recent. I know there's only a few countries that have engaged in it, but I think it's really important, if there is still room in this study, to get some initial findings from the programmatic approach to readiness, right? A 3-year approach, because it again links to the whole efficiency, I think, criteria that you had below, right? And I can tell you again from just experience, trying to close out the 18-month project versus trying to report on a 3-year project is a lot easier, right? And it's less transaction costs that you have to spend engaging with that, which leads me to the fourth point on the ad hoc reporting cycles, right, of readiness versus compared to funded activities, which, you know, you always have an annual performance report, your APR, and then you have your mid-year reporting. Whereas readiness, you can have, depending on when you sign the grant agreement, you can have reporting that starts in March, and, you know, and then continues in 6-month intervals, right? Is that really and truly helpful? Noting that when, you know, direct access entities that have multiple projects going on now have to, when, you know, the GEF and, you know, the funded activity for the GCF all come at this roughly around the same time, that readiness, if you have 3 or 4 readiness ongoing, you could potentially be re-reporting all 12 months of the year if you have 3 readiness projects going on as a direct access accredited entity. You know, that is not efficient. And so maybe we can have hopefully some questions on, is that ad hoc cycle that's linked to when the grant agreement becomes effective helpful? Because that's also linked to disbursement conditions, which is why we see that there's a lag in disbursements once we sign grant agreements. So some things maybe to potentially dig our teeth into there. So the fifth and the second to last point that I want to make is that I from experience, again, the Secretariat in its application does not really give deference to the unique combination of circumstances that SIDS face, right, in relation to transaction costs. And I give you this clear example. I think it's output 5 of the readiness framework. It talks about exchanging knowledge, right, regionally. We place in that a budget cost for traveling across the region, right? That is extremely expensive because of the high transaction costs in relation to cross-regional travel for SIDS, especially in the Caribbean region, but in all regions, right? And then the Secretariat not understanding the context, even after we've explained that this is just issues, are saying no, because there is a more broader, I guess, brushed feeling towards the cost of travel and it being flippant, they dismiss it. And it is only because, and I say this on the floor so that other board members can, it's only because you have persons in our department who actually understand the board policy and negotiate the board policy are saying, no, that's not it. Show us the board policy. It's your application of the policy, which we think is incorrect. And it's after about a 3-month period of back and forth that they then acquiesce because they don't want to be seen to block the access. That shouldn't be the issue for every other SID that's trying to do it, because I've had many other SIDs come to us with the same issues, saying that the GCF Secretariat just doesn't understand where we're coming from, so we're just going to do potentially a virtual workshop, which potentially doesn't work, right? In the context that you have and that you're facing, or they say that you can only apply for costs that deal with renting a car. How are you going to rent a car to go across the Caribbean region, right? We don't have an inter-regional highway. So it's just the lack of understanding of context, I think, sometimes with board application. And how can we get questions in this evaluation to hopefully ask whether or not this is just a one-off case, or 1 or 2 off case, or anything like that. And the last thing is readiness windows, right? And a point that I've constantly made as well is that readiness from the context of having an envelope only for countries, right, and not having an envelope for direct access entities, and have this synonymous feeling between the two, does disservice to direct access accredited entities that are not government entities. We talk about the private sector's involvement, right, for direct access. The reason why can't they, access readiness, is because the government, and rightfully so, has to have some sort of priority in the coordinating part of all of this to become ready, but everybody's fighting for this $1 million. And it goes to the point that Richard is making, right, as well, on the cap. And so we're gonna have to be very careful and balanced in our approach, so as not to ensure that GCF doesn't become a fund of readiness. But at the end of the day, there's certain additional windows that will prove advantageous, linking to broader strategic visions, like engaging with practically vulnerable private sector entities and having them directly access the GCF, which we know the GCF is not that great at doing. So I'll end there, but thanks a lot for the initial findings, IU. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mihai, for sharing with us your unique SIDS-related experience. It's really informative and useful to us as well. So a lot of things were said, and it's interesting that one of the things you brought up is the PPF versus RPSP, because to me personally, that was one of the most interesting findings of the RPSP Synthesis Note, and how there needs to be more clarity between the two concepts. So maybe on this PPF versus RPSP and on the need for programmatic approaches, maybe I could quickly invite Prashant to come in on these 2 points, and then I'll go to Stefan next. So yeah, Prashant, would you like to come in really quickly? Yeah.
Sure, thank you, Yonji. I'll just quickly say that on the point on differentiation between RPSP and PPF, yes, I mean, that is something which we found in the direct access synthesis, also noted that, and so did SPR. So this is a point which has come up repeatedly, and I think this RPSP independent evaluation is an opportune moment to dive much deeper into it and look at it in a more comprehensive manner. So that is something certainly we'll be looking at. And I might also point out that because when we're talking about pipeline development as one of the objectives, it'll inevitably come up in terms of what is the role RPSP has played or not played to that extent on contributing to pipeline development. And in that process, we'll certainly make it a point to incorporate this. On the second point on programmatic approaches on multi-year grants, that is certainly something that we will look at, and we will in fact consider that incorporating that into as one of the criteria to also look at for in the country case studies. So thank you.
All right, Stefan, please come in.
Thank you, Andreas and team, for this presentation. This was extremely useful. And we are looking forward, obviously, to the entire evaluation and report then. The readiness program is something that is very specific to the GCF. I think there is no other climate fund that has a similar program of this size and importance. At the same time, I think it's quite challenging as this is a fragmented portfolio. The entire volume envelope is about $500 million, but it's split, as you have shown, over, I think, currently 650 operations, part of them ongoing and part closed. So one element that we would like to see or hear from the evaluation is how the transparency on the results can be improved in this program, even if it's so fragmented. Because up to date, if I'm not wrong, the board members have not seen the individual reports from all these operations. And that's a pity, because I think in many of these reports, there would be information that is valuable to us also, for instance, in our bilateral cooperation, or maybe valuable to other climate funds to improve their operations. And so we miss, there's something if we don't have access to these reports. And then I think this is also access, also transparency on the results would also provide a certain pressure with regard to accountability, because I'm not sure how the financial side of these operations is really managed from the Secretariat. If you do control how the procurement is done of all these smaller slices of technical assistance and so on. On the substance, I would like to flag one issue. If it comes to capacity building, this is often person linked, so you do capacity for specific people in the governments usually, but this may be suffering from government changes. You have frequent changes in administrations. My question is this something that you are looking at, or could you look at this if people that have been beneficiaries of this program still are in place and use what they have been trained for? I think that's a particular element we would be interested in. And then I have a question with regard, or concern with regard to the country selection. You, if I'm right, you selected Belize as a probably for representing the SIDS community. Now, Belize is probably not a typical SIDS, because it's one of the very few countries in the SIDS group that is in fact not an island. It's a relatively large country, as opposed, I would say, for instance, the Pacific Islands. So it's my question whether from this example you will really be able to deduct then all the lessons that would be applicable for smaller and even much more remote countries like in the Pacific.
Stefan, you are on mute. You're on mute. We cannot hear you. So yeah.
And I had an exchange already with Andreas on the statistics. I hope that we all also will learn something on the statistics, who has benefited from this, and we would obviously like to see more involvement of private sector partners also in this program. I'm not sure how it works, because I assume that most of these proposals go through the focal points, through the NDAs, and this is usually a government, is by definition a government agency, so you may have a bias towards capacity building for the governments, but you may there not be able to reach out to the private sector. There was a last point I wanted to make, but I think I'm missing it now. Sorry. But anyhow, so it's very good that we have this evaluation coming, and the timing is such that it should feed into the GCF2 process, I guess. That's also important, because we have to define there whether this envelope should be increased or not, whether it should be changed, and the institutional aspects are very important. And what Richard said is, I think I have to echo, come up please with concrete recommendations, for instance, also with regard to the institutional setups and division of labor. So is it a smart thing that both the readiness program and the PPF do project preparation? Is there an overlap with project preparation that the adaptation fund could do, or the GEF? Can you more systematically use maybe the adaptation fund to do smaller tests, and then you bring them into this field. So that would relieve a little bit pressure from the readiness program. And in this respect, it comes to my mind the last point I wanted to make. Maybe one of the recommendations, at least I hear this from some board colleagues, let's put more funding in this program because it's so important. We do not have enough project in this country or on that topic, and so let's push this through the larger volume of readiness support. I think we should not forget the other side of the medal, which is if we have problems from the recipient side to deal with this project preparation, it's also due to relatively complex procedures and requirements we have. And we should not only look at increasing the volume of technical assistance, but also reducing the complexity and making it easier, the processes that you have on the side of the fund. For instance, this could go in a direction like making the different formats, templates that you use in different funds, like in the adaptation fund, in some of the smaller funds, in the CHEF, in the GCF, more similar or uniform, so that beneficiary countries do not have to face with each institution a different set of templates. And it goes on probably with the E&S standards that could be used, as you do right now, from the multilateral development banks. You could continue theoretically to use that instead of creating another different standard and so forth. So I think we should not just ask for more support on this envelope, but also look, maybe you will have, and that's why I'm mentioning this, maybe you will find through your interviews and the evaluation some hints what could be made easier and what would be a simplification program for the entire fund to make the life easier for and increase access to all the countries we are working with. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, very much for your comments. So on your first 2 points, the first being the transparency in tracking the results of RPSP better in a more systematic manner, and also the second question about the capacity building and whether we would look into the personnel kind of capacity building aspect, even in the context of government changes and things like that. I do think that we talked about it in the RPSP synthesis note. So maybe Anna, would you like to come in on these 2 points briefly first? So go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Yonji, and thank you very much, Stefan, for this down-to-earth comments. In terms of the transparency on the results, if I understand your question or suggestion correctly, I think RMF, if we assess RMF, it may help us better understand the results part of the readiness program, so the new results management framework. On the capacity building for specific people, yes, this is what we found in other evaluations on the frequent changes. We of course may revisit this finding. I'm not sure that we will find something else in that respect. Than other evaluations, our other evaluations found, but this is definitely something we can unpack a bit more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then there was a question about the country selection, specifically concerning Belize as well. So Prashant, would you like to comment on that one?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Yonji. Just to answer the question very quickly, Stefan, just to mention that as a part of this evaluation, those are not the exhaustive list of countries, and that's why we said inter alia, just those 5 countries. These are just countries we are thinking about at the moment. This is a long list essentially. So we will certainly look at a wider list of countries as well to see what is it that that best represents the priority countries for GCF, and countries from where we would be very interested in looking at results and which are best representative of the portfolio of GCF as a whole, both of its operations overall, but also of the readiness portfolio. So just to assure you that this selection is just to kind of give you a long list, and we may even do more than say 5 countries that we have represented. So rest be assured that we will try to do our best to have as wide a selection of countries as possible. Over. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andreas, would you like to come in on this point about maybe engaging more private sector through RPSP, the possibility of that? And in relation to that, Mihai earlier mentioned, this high transaction costs for SIDS, when doing business. Yeah, so maybe you could comment on that, those points.
Yeah, sure. Makai, this is really well heard. This is indeed something that we found not only in some of the recent evaluation, but that has been repeatedly said. And I just, just to make this point, we've had the SIDS evaluation done 2 years ago. We've done the LDC's evaluation, and now we bring forward the Africa evaluation. In all of these evaluations, the context was always very important, and it's not, we can't say that these contexts are all the same across a region. These are all regions that are very heterogeneous. So we have various countries for various levels. In the SIDS, we have the consideration in SIDS, even from a regional perspective. We've got the Indian Ocean, we've got the Pacific, and we've got also our colleagues in the Caribbean, with very different contexts that you need to deal with, and the same in Africa. And repeatedly, it was said that this concept of one size fits all is an issue, because it's the transaction cost, it's the understanding of the context that some things may cost more, as you highlighted with regards to transportation, but it's also this cost of coordination. So I wanted to make this point really briefly, if you allow me to get just this 1 minute. What we found in the SPR, but also overarchingly in the evaluations of these vulnerable country groups, we found repeatedly that this question of coherence and bringing forward coherence and complementarity is very much wanted, and it's something where we're still missing a mark. We're missing the opportunity to do so. Because as GCF, we could be in the position of doing far more in the coherence and complementarity. Just this week, I had a meeting with SMT, and we were discussing exactly this point from a perspective of our evaluations. And just to say, SMT is the senior management team of the GCF. And what I said is, and what we found from the evaluation is exactly that we see that there's a lot stronger cooperation at the international level, so at the level of the climate funds. We see that the GEF and the GCF are trying to align far better. We see that also the GCF and the Adaptation Fund try to align far better. As Stefan has already highlighted, there is opportunities, and these opportunities are seen and are done. But when we then come down to the country level, it's very difficult, because the country coordination is still not aligned, because we have many different donors, we have different templates, as Stefan said, we have different things that aren't coordinated. And when we come down to the project level, even further, it's difficult. And then the last pillar of this coherence and complementarity framework at the GCF would look at the question of coherence and complementarity across capacity building and readiness programs. And there we find, and we've set this across, there we find that our partners that we've got, there's not a single partner that can provide capacity, that can provide the support across all the different categories of capacity support that we have outlined in our RPSP strategy. So we've got still what we had in 2018, this mission overload of many different things that we want to do with readiness. But the issue then is that there are no perfect delivery partners that can do an array and a menu of this. And secondly, we can't look at the complementarity and coherence in regards to these readiness programs that might also be out there from other bilateral donors or other donors that we see. So it's still not very systematic. And that, in my final point on this, and that also reflects the same question when we look at contribution. So is the GCF contributing to capacity building? That's a very difficult question on the ground. It's an easy question when we only look at RPSP, but it's a very difficult question when we look on the ground, when we see that some choose to opt for other readiness programs, because perhaps it's simpler, perhaps it's more aligned with the private sector engagement angle that they're seeking. And then we can't really clearly see the contribution of the GCF in that particular context, or at least it's a little bit more difficult. So we'll try to see to bring something out of the discussions that we'll have in the countries and with the stakeholders. But again, on the results and the results and readiness, again, the results management, the RRMF has only been implemented now. It's not done retrospectively. We can't see these things then. We can try to see and use that framework to see in the country contexts that we're visiting if there are any positives. We've also outlined some positives in the SPR section on readiness. We've seen in the engagement with our stakeholders that some mention some positive effects and success stories. Anecdotally, they're not there captured in knowledge management processes and frameworks, but they are there. Stakeholder engagement, for instance, we've done a lot on that, and it's been working. But yeah, so we will see to treat if we can drill down on these questions of results as well. Thanks. I give it back to you, Yonji. Apologies for being so long.
No, it was good. Thank you. All right. Next up is Jean-Christophe. So please come in, Jean-Christophe. Yeah.
Thank you, Yonji. Hopefully my connection won't be too bad. I'm a bit concerned about it, but just to be very quick, my intervention is mainly to support most of the perspectives mentioned by Richard, Mikhail, and Stefan so far. Maybe just willing to highlight three of them. First is building on points made by Richard on the delegation of authority, but also the need suggested by Stefan to bring back some results to the board. I wonder whether it could be useful to have a look on the need for more political scrutiny on the readiness program, considering the importance for the partners of the GCF, the countries, to look at the need for political scrutiny by the board on this program. Second, and to echo Mikhail's point on the programmatic approach, I think programmatic approach, is good in general, but it could be very, very important to look at it in the context of the readiness program specifically. That would be key to me, because the readiness has some peculiarities that would probably make programmatic approach much more relevant than in other programs. And finally, just to go along and support others who mentioned the need to look at the necessary connection between the readiness program and the accreditation strategy and accreditation program. I think we have not yet done everything we can to connect these two programs. That's push on that would be good from your side. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Christophe. We took note of all your points. So I think on your last one, especially about connecting RPSP with accreditation strategy, that one maybe we didn't discuss as much. So maybe on that topic, Prashant, could you come in and respond to Jean-Christophe's comment?
Thank you, Yonji. I just want to quickly bring the attention to one finding, and you will see that also in the document that has been circulated on the synthesis, that one of the things that we do say, for example, is that while we don't connect readiness directly to the strategy itself, we do connect readiness to the operationalization of the previous accreditation approach, if you will. So to that extent, previous evaluations have spoken about the linkage between the readiness operations and the accreditation side of GCF. Now, if we are talking about the new strategy that has been approved, in the previous board session, then that is certainly something we will look at, and we will consider, in fact, looking at the policy and landscape, and what it means for GCF in a substantive piece if we can. So I'll stop there and I'll just say that we have taken that on board. We will look both at the strategy side of linking it to accreditation and also the operational side of linking, considering what it has borne in terms of results, of course, in terms of on the accreditation side of operations of GCF. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we've gone 6 minutes over, but I am looking around to see if there's anyone else who wants to come in. Any further questions or comments? Okay, Andrea, so I give you the floor for your maybe closing remarks. Go ahead.
Yeah, it will be very quick. I just wanted to highlight as well, look, when we looked at the RPSP strategy 2.0, the strategy that was finalized and brought forward in 2019, we see that obviously the GCF had the interest to enhance exactly that, to use RPSP far more for the accreditation components of the work of the GCF. So it mentioned that that was also mentioned by Anastasia in her presentation on the modalities, the operational modalities for RPSP, and it was very clearly said in the strategy that this should support and enhance the institutional support for direct access. So we'll definitely in the review of how far the strategy has come and in deepening that understanding from a perspective of the strategy, we'll definitely look at that. And hopefully, so thanks, Jean-Christophe, for this question. Hopefully, we'll be able to bring this as well as in a timely manner for the discussions at the board on the new strategy. So it might be as well an interesting thing that we could perhaps look at very soon and prioritize that work over others to bring this a little bit more timely. But yeah, thanks again for bringing that forward. This is excellent. Again, colleagues, we're using all your inputs here for refining some of the questions that we had with regards to the evaluation. We are just rolling out the evaluation that the external firm has not even been chosen. So also with regards to the countries, as Prajan said, this is still ongoing work. So we have a long list. We're trying to see what makes sense in terms of the country context, but also in terms of how many readiness proposals were there, what sort of readiness proposals were seen in the countries or were used in the countries, and what did that mean in terms of successes, but also challenges. With this, we bring to you this following board meeting, that's upcoming board meeting, the synthesis note. We hope you enjoy the reading and you'll be able to use that to stay informed, also for the decision making at the board. And otherwise, we're always ready to consult with you and hear you out on any thoughts that you may have for readiness and for the readiness evaluation as we move forward. Again, we're bringing this, we're finalizing this by the end of the year, and we'll bring this as soon as the first board meeting in the following year. So thank you very much, and have a very, very good morning, afternoon, or evening here for the people in South Korea. Thank you.